Any questions about that so far? Hi, Karens. We got a couple Karens.
Good morning.
Any questions about any of that so far? That's kind of, so now we have this, and this is going to look really nice to Gene. I know there's going to be a day where Gene looks at this and he sees the roadmap and it's all lined out and it's like, oh, don't have to start here, but hey, it is actually really nice to have these things in some sort of logical order of approaching it. And I can completely understand. My mind works like that too. That's the interesting thing about the way that I was offering tea before is if I was a new person and I was listening to it, I probably wouldn't have, I would have been like, well, where's my roadmap? Yeah. So any questions about this as a beginning? Shayna, does this all make sense? Ida, is this making sense? The approach that I'm taking with this in the beginning, keep in mind, we're still not into embodiment yet. So we haven't really started to embody tea. We're kind of just getting, the gist of it. Mindful walking, mindful driving, mindful beverage. What do we mean by mindful? Tricks of attention, maintaining mindfulness and presence by maintaining tricks of attention, which is what we call the third pillar. And of course, we haven't talked about that yet if somebody is brand new at this, but you guys all know what the third pillar is though. So there we go. Okay, now we start to get into a little bit more of building your practice throughout the day. And we started with checking in. So checking in is still not redirection. Checking in, well, it is a form of redirection, but it's not rule of three. What we're doing with checking in is we're literally just throughout the day, because we're new at this kind of stuff, we're just saying, oh, here I am in this moment. I can do my practice. Where's a trick of attention? And that's it. And then you go about your day. And then until you forget again, and then you remember again, and then you forget again, and then you remember again. And we're not going to get down on ourselves, but we'll get into that a little bit later too when we talk about leaking power. So we're not going to get down on ourselves for forgetting, because remembering is the victory, as Donna would point out. So does that make sense? The next section, when we start to build our practice, we're just in the very beginning of this, so we just start with checking in. Now, for you guys, I recommend checking in the second you wake up. There's no time to waste. There's no such thing. So the moment I wake up, I just engage my practice, and I have my practice written down on a note card, and I can't do all of them all at the same time. So I do focus on certain ones on certain days just for the hell of it. I'll just say, all right, today, really going to focus on defocused vision. That's really going to be it today. I'm going to have this whole toolbox though, because I may need it to adapt to something. So, but just today for the fun of it, I know I'm going to be driving, so I'm going to do a lot of breaking the horizon for that balance of ground and sky. Creates this bubble of perception. So that's what I'm going to do today. That's how I approach my day as well. And that's how I would recommend building your practice. So we started with checking in. That's how we establish that first pillar of presence. And then a way that we can establish mindfulness, ironically, is with words. So mindfulness, by definition, is existing or engaging or paying attention to the present moment without thought streams about it necessarily occurring. So I can look at the remote control and I don't necessarily have to think a thought about it. I can look at the forest. I can look at the lake. I can look at the river. I can look at the chalkboard. I can look at Gene while he talks. And I don't necessarily have to think a thought stream about it. That's mindfulness. And the third pillar is how we maintain mindfulness once it's been established. Hopefully to the point where we're embodying mindfulness at all times. And then that's it. That's pretty much what this practice is, and quite a bit can occur as a result. So it's huge effect for just a very simple thing that we're doing. So productive self-talk is definitely a conversation that is important early on, especially to someone that is like Gene and I, who have a very strong devil's advocate. But wait, hold up. Like, so I hear what you're saying, but then I got this voice over here that's just basically questioning and looking at it from a different angle, and it's not always trying to figure it out. Sometimes it's just that curious voice that's just like, oh, but what about, how does that add up? So sometimes it is trying to figure it out. There's definitely a threshold to when it can become that. But there's also times where the voice of power, just our mind, the way we think. Not everybody's going to be like this, but it tends to want to look at it from all angles, or all, I'm putting that in air quotes, multiple angles. We want to see it from a 360 perspective. So with that in mind, it is very important to discuss how thought can be a productive endeavor. So this entire T system, when I go back to the act of allowing, that's kind of what's unique-ish about T, that we're not trying to control. It is the act of allowing. We're not necessarily trying to change, and we're not necessarily trying to go to one opposite end of the spectrum, thinking that this new opposite end is somehow the better end of the spectrum. You see what I mean? Sometimes they'll show us people who are living in some tropical location, and every day they're just hunting with the fish, and it's just this, oh, and it's like, oh God, I want that. I don't want to go to work. I don't want to get stuck in traffic. I want to just sit on a beach with, you know, Tom Brady and the rest of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and just hang out all day, act like I won a Super Bowl. So, that's kind of, we see something and we kind of fixate on certain things, and it becomes a trap. It becomes a box that we're putting ourselves in, as opposed to engaging infinite potential, which could be a wide variety of things. So basically what I'm saying is that the T practice does not declare war on thought. And some practices do. Some practices want you to have no mind. I don't know what that is. So you've probably noticed I don't say that. And somebody could tell me their definition of no mind, and I think that's great. I just don't use that term because I have a lot of things going on in my mind. It's not just word-based cognition. I'm not just thinking to myself. There's a lot going on here, folks. So I never have no mind. But there can be moments where my thought is either interrupted, meaning that the continuous stream of internal self-chatter has been interrupted. And in the world today, in the island of the practical, people like to use outside things to interrupt that stream of thought. And I'm not going to declare war on that either. I'm not going to say you should never do. Come on. It's fine. If you had a long day and you want to have a beer, who am I to judge? That's helping you relax. I would recommend all things in balance. So I'm not going to go again from one end of the spectrum and cling to this side and reject another. This is about balance. This is about finding your golden mean and learning how to adapt within that bubble of adaptability to where you still feel peace. That's the trick. We want to still feel peace while adapting to everything that we could potentially be encountering, including our own battlegrounds, maybe some of our old forms of cognition. We can approach it with balance. We can approach it without trying to control, without trying to change, without declaring war. And so with that in mind, T approaches thought the same way. I am never going to say that you should never think, that we are not supposed to be thinking, or that you're going to somehow be better because you have no thought. That's not necessarily the case. So the idea that we embrace in the beginning of this practice is that thought can be functional, that thought doesn't have to be repetitive, it doesn't have to be habitual, and it doesn't have to make us feel unwell, that we can actually learn to collaborate with our thought. I love the word collaboration. It really expresses what we're doing here so much better, pretty much than any other word, because we're learning to collaborate with the present moment. We're learning to collaborate with the energy around us. We're learning to collaborate with our thought, not declaring war on it. Exactly, Shannon. Now, does that make sense before I go any further? Mike, does that make sense? Is that okay? We're not telling you not to think here, buddy. And I know you know that. I'm picking on you because you have an eagle picture and I like eagles. So, but does that, okay, Ida says that makes sense. Does that make sense, Mike? We're not going to declare war on thought here.
That makes sense. Yeah, that happens all the time. I declare war on something in my head, and I hear that.
Ironically, you use thought to declare war on thought. Isn't that a funny little fickle thing? Have you noticed that? That you're
That is-
using your voice of cognition to declare
Oh
war on your
yeah,
voice of cognition? That's the snake eating its own tail.
absolutely. Yeah.
But the snake doesn't have to deny that it has a tail. It can just look at it and say, there's my fucking tail. I'm just not going to eat it. I can have a tail and that's okay. Hey, that's actually a really good analogy, isn't it? The snake can look at the tail and just say, I have a tail and I'm not going to eat that. I'm going to go eat something else. And that's the same thing that is occurring with thought in a manner of speaking. So now here's another difference with T though, if I could digress a second. What are we doing with thought? So T is a little bit different. And that's what I meant when I said that this relates to the act of allowing. So I'm not going to tell you what to think. In hydrostasy, I will. In T, I will not. You don't have to do hydrostasy. That's a choice. If you really want to, I don't know, try more things that I can teach, that I can share because I've done them. So if you want to try some of those things, you can. If you don't have to. But hydrostasy is going to be super specific. It's this is what I did, this is what I do. And if you want to try it, give it a try and then we'll talk about it. And you could tell me, what's your experience with it and we can learn from each other. That's great. But so the idea is the act of allowing is not attempting to control. We're just using our attention. But in the world today, we're being told what to do with our thinking. Has anybody noticed that? You're being told that you should think this way or that you should think that way. Has anybody noticed that? Is that something that's occurring or am I just making that up? That sometimes, just like when you walk into a yoga studio, they tell you how to breathe. Very often when we walk into these mindfulness forums or these groups of thinkers, I don't know what to call them, philosophers or coaches or teachers, religions, they're wanting to tell you how you should think. Sometimes they're very subtle about it, such as think positive. And it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I should just think positive all the time. And again, I'm not going to tell you not to think positive if that's interrupting the repetitive habitual stream of thought that's not making you feel well. So if Gene just says everything is working out for me while getting punched in the face, but that's helping a little bit for him for whatever reason, then I'm not your judge, but there's probably going to come a moment where you realize you're still getting punched in the face and that you need to still move and adapt to that requires your adaptation. You have to respond to that. And that just being passive and allowing that punch in the face isn't necessarily benefiting you or anyone for that matter. Does that make sense? So what I'm differentiating right now is how T recommends redirecting thought and how the world sometimes wants to recommend interacting with your thought. They're giving you things to think about, telling you how you should think. T doesn't necessarily do that. Now, hydrostasy might, because it might be more specific, like with mantras, for example. You don't have to do it. It's just making a lot of detailed suggestions that you can use or not. But T is creating a framework, and that framework is for you to fill in the blanks. So essentially, this is kind of where we get into the rings of power a little bit. This might actually be a perfect time if we were introducing T to introduce the rings of power, because what we're really looking to do with our internal dialogue, with our thought, and this is what I mean by functional in the beginning, is to point back to your practice. So the thought is pointing back to deliberate attention, points of attention. It's pointing back to the act of allowing. It's pointing back to not trying to control. It's pointing back to the practice. So I can give you a couple different examples. So saying a leaky basement. Their basement's full of water. It's going to be very expensive. It kind of sucks. And a person thinks, oh God, this is happening again, poor me. And, nothing is working out for me. And this is all my fault. And this is because I'm stupid. Okay, so now that type of cognition, we would just call straight leaking power. That there's nothing beneficial about that whatsoever. That's the worst kind of thinking a person can think, is thoughts that are getting down on themselves. And then by extension, others. People will start to think that way too, where they're thinking bad things about, and I say bad things, they're thinking negatively, they're thinking hurtfully, they're thinking in ways that are not loving about themselves and about other people. So that is a form of, all of those are forms of what we call, and I'll explain this later down the road, but it's a phrase that we call leaking power. It's the worst kind of cognition that we can have. So, that type of cognition, some people would say, well, then just counter that with thinking positive. And then so thinking positive would be something like, everything is working out for me. I'm a winner. I can do this. So thinking positive is fine. And that's a certain type of thinking. So what T is suggesting is just a little bit different than that. What T is suggesting is that when we find ourselves in unproductive cognition, or just when we check in throughout the day, we check in, where is our mind? What we're recommending is to use words to reinforce the practice by reinforcing tricks of attention. Not even necessarily principles in the beginning. You don't even have to reinforce principles, because those could be just a belief right now. It hasn't been proven to you. You haven't experienced it so that it's a part of your, knowledge. And by knowledge, I mean information and experience to equal knowledge. So maybe you haven't had the experience with it yet, so it's still just a belief. So in the beginning, we can use words that just point back to our tricks of attention. So this is what it would look like for me. I would step away and I would say, here I am. And now I'm going to start to name things that are present with a voice in this life, in this body, with this breath, in this room. I can see the light. I can see the shadows. I can see everything around me. This is the moment. This is what's happening now. I can be present. Here I am. You see what I mean? So maybe I have a phrase that reminds me to be here, to be now, that everything around you is what's actual. It's moving around you. Even naming things in the room is a great strategy. So what I'm recommending with this practice is that we learn to check in. And then when we check in, we use our thought to point back to our practice, to point back to tricks of attention. Does that make sense? And that is what I would start to call the beginning of productive self-dialogue. And that will come in handy when it's time to start doing what we call the rule of three. It's a redirection because we change attention. It is a redirection. It is a form of redirection. You're right. It's just a little bit different than cognitive redirection therapy. That's just a little bit different, but this is the precursor to that. So it really is still just, it is a form of redirection. Redirection back to the present moment, back to the second ring of power. I agree. Yeah. Now, so once something is demonstrated to you, what I mean by demonstration is it is a part of the present moment. So you see it, you feel it. It's like right there in front of you. The voice of power, well, I guess that's not how I've called it. Productive dialogue can start to reflect that. You can start to dialogue what is occurring that is a byproduct of the practice that you expected. Does that make sense? And I call that telling yourself true things. For example, in this moment, I can be present. None of you guys can, I'm doing it right. Like, you can't tell me otherwise. I can be present. I'm doing it right now. So that's something about the present moment. Do you see what I mean? And that's why it's more the act of allowing. Yes, I'm using my words, and you know, it is a form of redirection. It's just not cognitive redirection therapy. That's something just a little bit different because we're looking to redirect really heavy stimuli. But this is definitely the precursor to that. Gentle steering. Yeah, that's what we're starting in the beginning, gentle steering. And then by all means, if somebody wants to, they they want more than just gentle steering because they're seeing, there's times of their day where there's just, we gotta change something about this, then just skip forward to the rule of three. And that's going to be at the very beginning of counterbalance. We just jump right into that with counterbalance. Cognitive redirection therapy, when we start to use our own internal dialogue as a part of at least 3 different points of engaging the present moment to redirect dysfunctional cognition. So now we start to work with this binary distinction between functional and dysfunctional. Here comes devil's advocate. Well, who says what's functional? Who decides what's functional? How is it making you feel? Is it making you feel productive? Is it making you feel inspired? Is it making you feel creative? Is it feel newish? Maybe not brand new, but at least newish. Or is it going the other direction where it's starting to feel old? It's starting to feel like the same old, same old. You've said this before in the same order again and again and again. In this exact situation, you keep saying the same shit. So those are going 2 different directions, and it's your job. This is why this is an empowerment approach. It is your job to gauge it, differentiate it, and then learn to redirect. Does that make sense? All right, easy peasy. So there's all kinds of examples, the productive self-dialogue, like everything else, will start to take on a completely different composure the more that you do it. Eventually, productive self-dialogue becomes something that I call activating inner guru, the voice of power, our connection to the infinite. Inner guru and the voice of power, it's not the way that I'm describing it. I'm not telling you what's what for you about the universe. I'm just describing something, and I'm just describing it in the best way that I know how. The voice of power is just describing the present moment. That's it. That's what it does. So you can feel peace now. That's a part of the present moment. So the voice of power will remind you of what's what. What is what about this moment happening right this second? Not in the future. It's not telling you, which stocks you should pick. The voice of power isn't testing you. It's not, there's no tests. It's not pass or fail. It's not, giving you wisdom, or it is the voice of power is your voice. It's just a voice that is connected to everything around you. And when there's no resistance, that voice will start to say things that you'll look around, you'll be like, oh yeah, okay, that's, and I'm going to put it in air quotes, true. We're feeling its truth to us, to ourselves. We're feeling that truth in our experience through our experience. We're experiencing it. Does that make sense? And then so the voice of power starts to reinforce principle. The voice of power starts to redirect back to the present moment. The voice of power eventually, when there is no resistance, the voice of power will just be this creative thing that occurs. Does that make sense? And when I say activating the voice of power, I mean talking to yourself on purpose in a way that points back to the practice, reminding yourself, telling yourself truth. And I put true in air quotes, and maybe there's a better word, I don't know, but telling yourself true things, things that you know, things that you have experienced, that you can intuit about the present moment. All of that can serve the purpose of building the voice of power, pointing back to the practice, and helping you to remember more. Ultimately, that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to remember more often so that eventually we remember more than we forget, so that eventually we can remember all the time, so that eventually we are aware of our thoughts, aware of our actions, aware of our emotions, all as it's happening, so that we can choose the direction that we want to go as it's happening. And that's called conscious creation. And if we do the practice the way that we're learning it, then we'll be able to do the conscious creation in flow and in a perpetual type of flow that doesn't necessarily need words. Words will probably just occur as a form of communication, as a form of clarity, as a form of aha. Aha is telling you something about the moment. You're like, aha, like, oh my God, like, how did I not see this before? So that's what Inner Guru is really doing. You're walking down an alley, and the alley, aha, I shouldn't go down that alley. I feel it. Like, that's telling me something about the present moment, that it's not in alignment. That's really what this is about, alignment or not in alignment. And that's a bit philosophical that we would talk more about down the road. But that feeling that we're feeling is resistance and non-resistance, and then allowing and not allowing. Eventually will become so present because of the practice that we'll be able to feel almost immediately when we're going out of alignment, when we're going out of this perpetual flow. And what do? You redirect. You go back to the practice. It's the same thing. I'll be 110. And if I feel myself, coming out of alignment, I'm going to rule of 3. I'm going to go back to the world around me. I'm going to go back to my breath, my body, my tricks of attention, my hydrostasy practice as it will be when I'm 110. Who knows what it will look like by then, but it'll be something. All right. So any questions about this so far? We're checking in and we're using our own cognition. We're talking to ourselves in a particular way that points back to presence and mindfulness. And most importantly, the voice that we're using, the productive cognition, is pointing back to a trick of attention. That's when the voice of power in the beginning is, or the productive cognition, that's when it's going to be the most productive in the beginning, is when it's reminding us to go back to our tricks of attention. If we look at that as rings of power, then we want our voice, the productive cognition, to point back to the second ring of power so that I can get back to feeling the third. And then when they start to balance out, when the cognition is all of a sudden, it's all creative, it's all new, it's all fresh, you are now in a bubble of balance where the first ring is now a ring of power. You will be more logical. You will have better ideas. You will be able to deduce, and you'll be able to do these things quicker without all of the need for deliberation and cognition and thinking about it and trying to control. You'll try something. It won't be maybe exactly how you wanted it to, and you won't go towards the unproductive cognition. The voice of power will just tell you, well, what did you learn? Let's try again. Let's do something a little bit different with it this time. Still didn't turn out. I'm actually talking about my baking right now. Still didn't turn out. That's okay. The voice of power reminds me, you're learning, one foot in front of the other. Everything is working out for you. Let's just keep going. Let's just keep moving. And that the voice of power is it's just describing the present moment. I can't keep moving. Why not? Does that make sense? Now, another thing I'll say, we can apply this to all those other practices. So when you're doing your fox walking and you find that you're not doing your fox walking, You can use your voice of power to go back to your practice. In this moment, I can feel my feet on the ground. In this moment, I can feel my golden line and I can breathe. When you're doing your 4 modes practice, oh, I forgot. Well, in this moment, I have remembered. That's a true thing. You have remembered. In this moment, I can rise and pay attention to the rising and the transition. I can do that. That's a true thing. I can do it. You can do it right now. You see what I mean? So you don't need anybody else to confirm this for you. This is your knowing. I'm putting knowing in air quotes because we don't want to get too attached to knowing stuff. Uh-oh, my battery's running low despite being plugged in. 6% remaining. Well, that's all I got really for this conversation is that. Do you guys have any questions about that? Is there anything I can help you with and how you can work with that, what you can do with this? How about the order of operations and how it's all been presented? Does it all make sense? Any comments, concerns? Mike, does that make sense? Voice of power, where's it at today? Are you reminding yourself of this practice? Now, here's what the voice of power, the productive dialogue doesn't do. It doesn't try to figure it out. It doesn't compare and contrast. It doesn't attempt to control. So if you're sitting here questioning yourself, am I doing, that's not your that's your old voice. That's the old repetitive habitual questioning everything. Is this right? Is this wrong? How could this be better and worse and more plus and more minus and more up and more down or more left or more right? No, 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 no. That's not the voice of power. The voice of power reminds you that I can put my attention anywhere I want to in this moment. That's my practice. Does that make sense, Mike?
Makes sense, Ernest. Sure. Yeah, the redirection back to our own presence, our own breath. I'm hearing that, practicing that in the moment right now.
Yep, and that's it. So productive dialogue, and we can talk about this more tomorrow, and then we can talk about it more throughout the week as we go along. And it is official. I have written up my 2 weeks notice for Beyond Hello. I have notified the other interview I was supposed to have today that I'm not going to be doing that interview. And I'm going to let Bobby at the restaurant know that I am not going to be helping him at the restaurant. And I'm going to commit to building something full time. And this is another example. It's not win or lose. It's not, anything like that. It's not right decision, wrong decision. It feels good. We have the opportunity and it all still goes towards what I want. I have a clear desire and I call it my highest vision. So my table on, that has all my art and it has a laptop. Well, everything I'm creating now can be on that laptop. So it still fits in perfectly. And who knows, that stand could be in front of one of our centers that has our name on the front. That is one of our T centers or academies of conscious creation, whatever we choose to call it when the time comes. So there's plenty, of opportunity and it all is still leading towards something. So there's no pass and fail. There's no wrong or right. Ultimately, though, I will not be making an income. So I will have some things coming that will, be a small cost. So yeah, it's about balance. So it's not about everything for free. And it's not about how to make a 7-figure internet venture. It's about balance between the two. I want just enough to take care of things, but not too much because I'm not greedy. I'm not trying to take. But then again, I can't give everything away for free and expect to do it full time. So I have to find that nice balance. And that's what Golden Mean Principle really is. So now's the time. And it feels pretty inspiring right now. So with that being said, there's going to be a lot more time slots. Like we're going to be doing a whole lot more. And it's going to be a little bit different than we did before. When in 2017, of course, I started to teach full time, and I was very wet behind the ears. I didn't really have a plan. I didn't know what I was doing, and that's okay. One foot in front of the other, you learn, you go, you apply. That's wisdom. Applying what you learned in the moment happening now is wisdom. So hopefully some of that wisdom is going to be applied. We're going to try some things. They're going to be a little bit different than we did before, but also some similarities. But now we have a complete practice. It's easy to communicate. It makes a lot of sense. It all goes well together. A person can apply it. A person can do it. So yeah, that's it. We're going to go full time. You're going to see some more classes. You're going to see some more opportunities. So for any one of you now, we have a clear path for one-on-ones. So Mike, if you came to a one-on-one, I got a clear part of T that we can just jump right into that could be very beneficial for your overall practice, because it's a complete practice now. Where are we in warrior training? Where are we in seers training? Are you doing a little bit of hydrostasy because you're, maybe trying to attempt some of the techniques that I do, because that's what I can offer, the techniques that I do. Right? So yeah, ready or not, here we go. So we'll see how it all moves and flows, and yeah.
Cool. Yeah, for me, it's like recognizing the attempts to control is what as you're talking into some of it, I'm thinking for myself, that like my mind comes up with attempts to control. Like I'm thinking into my day and my week and other people as you're talking. I'm not exactly using it as a second trick of attention, as a background trick of attention. I'm allowing my mind to go into the different things, and yeah, it starts to create the typical trauma play. And then as you're talking about these things, in your vision of it, I can notice that little bit of
Hey,
interplay just to redirect back to the point.
hey, Mike. Ernest's computer kind of froze up, so I just wanted to let you know. You might have to repeat that. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just making sure. He'll be right back. He's like kind of frozen there, as you can see.
Yeah, it looks cool. It looks like we should
He's really paying
snapshot. We
attention.
should
Well, he
snapshot
was.
that for the
I thought he
launch.
was very focused.
Yeah, he does look really focused.
Someone grab a snapshot of that, man, for the launch.
Oh,
That's
he
it.
disappeared.
He'll be back.
Yeah, he's coming
But
back.
I'm just saying that while he's talking about it and his vision, I'm seeing that my mind is probably in a bubble of perception that's just probably 3 or 4 stages away from what he's talking about, that into, the different things that I do. And I can see myself be able to redirect it like back right here. Those kind of are first bubbles. I can choose to go catch up with that or write it down or maybe do it, but I don't have to be in that. And I can see that as a quick thinking away from what I'm gonna call the point right now, like the here I am. And yeah, I just noticed that, like, again.
Oh, thank you. Muted yourself. I lost you.
Yeah, I noticed that again, allowing, that crow on my back, the thinking mind, if you will, is
There you go.
yeah. And then sometimes we're the crow too, and we need to release that to go do something, and put something in the world, but we can keep flying, we don't have to go into the weeds with every bit of the hunt.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's most
Looks like he's
interesting to be involved with this. Yeah. It's most interesting to be involved with this project with the Native Americans out in Shinnecock in the Hamptons. They have the land there, and they had people dying of COVID, and we went out and showed them how to protect themselves and to allow for the project.
Cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. And we started it there, but passed them the sprayers, passed them the juice, if you will, and passed them all the stuff, and now we're working in the project with the council and the people there, and they have a real universal look at the land and the way of everything. And so there's an amazing slowness about it and peacefulness about it. At the same time, though, this is a rapid pandemic, and the interplay of me working with them and trying to allow and slow down enough to allow it to connect while weeks are going by, is the most interesting for me at this moment. I was on with them last night, and some of them are dreamers and just like me, and to allow for it but also get it done and protect people is has been just interesting play in my life right now. So I'm utilizing this training, if you will, and just thinking about, or I am thinking about it. But
Yeah, understandable. Reflecting, it sounds like.
yeah, I'm looking on Thursday at the next Zoom not to push and to just listen.
Is anyone talking? I can't hear.
Yeah, we were talking. Yeah,
Oh, I don't have
You're
volume.
back.
I was
we
just,
can hear
I
you.
could hear Mike just a second ago.
Yeah, he was telling us about a project he was working on.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, our internet is very unstable, Shayna.
Yeah, I can sense that. I got a message on my end too.
I have this Wi-Fi repeater, so I need to hook that up. Okay.
It was so cool. It froze at like the perfect snapshot of you, like giving your dissertation, and it was pretty cool.
Was it like this?
No, you were just like super focused on like, it looked like you were really paying attention to what Mike was saying.
Which I'm sure is true. All right, so this is the only thing the other thing I wanted to talk about today before we go. So, any questions about this so far? Oh, this is a different whiteboard. All right, so the other one's gone. So, we have our day, and we've been talking about this. So I'm really hoping that this is starting to, Mike, so we're talking about your practice, we're talking about how to establish your practice, how to do the T practice. What are we doing? So all throughout the day, we're checking in, and we're back to the moment. And so basically it's checking in, and then you use the voice of power, you use the productive dialogue to go back to the practice. Now, we have checking in the moment we wake up. That's in here. And then we have establishing our toolbox. That's going to be in here. And you could write that on a note card, Ida. You could write it anywhere you want to, but this is going to be points of attention. What are some tricks of attention that you can use? They can be a little bit artsy if you want to, the timelessness of the moment happening now. You can do that. The only person you can hustle is yourself. So, is that a deliberate point of attention? You tell me. So we have establishing your toolbox. We have preparing for battlegrounds. I heard an old school computer sound just a second ago. One of the old school beeps. And then so we prepare for our battlegrounds. How about what Donna recommended with segmenting? Because I know at 5 p.m. I'm going to hit a wall. I know it. I know that ride to work, that's going to be a battleground. So I need to make sure I have plenty of tools in my toolbox. And I've already checked in today, and I'm already checking in and going back to the practice. That's the huge overarching part of this, is checking in, back to the practice, checking in, back to the practice. That's why I put that on top, because we'll be doing that all throughout the day. Until, of course, we're maintaining a point of attention all day long. And then there's less checking in because you're checked in. And I get that. Now, here's something that I found beneficial in my practice is, and this goes along with the voice of power, or it goes along with productive self-dialogue, so I'll write it that way. well, what's a good way to say this? So basically, here's the idea. When it's a lot like telling yourself true things. It points back to the practice and it reaffirms principles. That's the way that at a certain point I could talk to myself. So let's say, how about when the customer was yelling at me at the dispensary? I reminded myself that saying anything right now is going to make it worse. Saying anything right now is going to make it worse. So that is an example of the voice of power, and it's an example of productive cognition, and it's an example of kind of describing the principles of balance, describing the principles of attention. So for example, let's say I wake up sad. The way that my mantra would be, what I would tell myself, not necessarily around a belief, although semantics, it is kind of a belief, but we're also describing something about our present moment, such as it's all changing. Everything is changing, including changing. The sadness won't be here forever. When has sadness ever been there forever? Hasn't. So this is change. Does that make sense? So the productive dialogue. Am I still frozen? Okay, this is our kitchen. All right, see you guys tomorrow, 7 a.m. if you can make it. I'll get all this worked out. We'll fix our internet. But thanks for hanging out, and we'll talk more about productive dialogue as we go throughout the week.
Okay, thank you.
All right, see you guys. Thank you.
Nice kitchen.
Thanks. That's the coffee machine behind us. Keurig Duo. See you guys.